Good evening. You're watching the evening news from Channel 1 in Moscow. First, the main events of the day. In St. Petersburg today, the second plenary meeting of the Inter-Parliamentary Assembly of the Commonwealth of Independent States came to a close. The Ukraine Cabinet of Ministers passed a number of emergency documents in order to protect the country from an economic catastrophe. Russian Vice Premier Sergei Shakhdai said in Stavropol today that they've reached a decision to create safeguard measures to protect Russian policy in the Northern Caucasus. Russian-U.S. negotiations in Geneva continued successfully today in making agreements on limiting strategic offensive weapons. Fernando Collor, the president of Brazil, accused of corruption, resigned from his post today, and the new president of Brazil is Itamar Franco. The second plenary meeting of the Inter-Parliamentary Assembly in St. Petersburg finished its work today. They passed a number of recommendations on constitutional reforms for the CIS states, including rapprochement on national legislation, first and foremost economic policy, and the formation of common environmental space. Today they decided to pass a number of documents based on the foundation and development of economic ties between the former republics of the Soviet Union and agreements on social welfare in making the transition to a market economy. They've decided to establish a common environmental space and work together on the war against organized crime. They were all seriously concerned about the unstable situation in Tajikistan. The decision was made that parliaments of countries not participating in the Commonwealth may take part in future meetings of the Inter-Parliamentary Assembly. Journalists said that the meeting was fairly peaceful and constructive. Our specialists feel that this is because of preparatory meetings that were held before the Assembly. We also must state that everyone is sick and tired of political debates, and everyone has the New Year's in mind. This is Ruslan Hasbulatov, and he says, "We all share a common fate. For decades, we've been closely linked to one another, just as we witnessed at our meetings here in St. Petersburg. I would like to wish all our citizens success, happiness, and health, and hope that in the new year we will be able to alleviate the difficulties which our citizens are now facing." Russian President Boris Yeltsin signed 2 orders today. One is control on the export from the Russian Federation of equipment and material that can be used more than once, and related technology that is being used for nuclear purposes. Also established was a Council for the Russian Federation on Environmental Policy. The chairman of this council will be the President's advisor on the environment and health, Alexei Vladimirovich Yablokov. The press center of the Supreme Soviet of the Russian Federation said that a Russian delegation led by Ruslan Hasbulatov will visit Jordan, Israel, Egypt from the 2nd to the 10th of February at the invitation of the parliaments of those countries. At a press conference today, Stanislav Shuchkevich said that this past year has not been easy. However, there is reason to be optimistic. The Parliament of the Republic has overcome superfluous ethnic disputes and are working constructively and creatively to establish effective legislation. The decline in production has come to a halt, and in fact, in November and December, there was a slight increase in production, although it was no more than 1%. Nonetheless, it is hoped that in the next year, the atmosphere will be fairly peaceful and more or less calm. The problems that did arise were primarily related to the ambitiousness of individual politicians who were trying to work in favor of their own individual interests. I think that what we need to do is avoid such behavior in the future and live according to the law. And if the law is not an effective one, and I have to say that we do have some ineffective laws, then we need to work in a civilized manner in order to change these laws. Currently, we are working on a new constitution, and I think this is one of the more important aspects of our work. Today, the Ukraine Cabinet of Ministers decided to increase the minimal salary in the country such that by January it would amount to 4,600 coupons, and then it would be adjusted periodically thereafter. They also decided that there would be a common tariff net on wages, which will increase 14 times. That is, it'll be 14 times higher between the first and the last. In order to curb inflation, they will freeze the average wages at state enterprises and so-called small businesses that are, so to speak, parasitizing large businesses by using up the raw materials and equipment will have to be re-registered, and thus we hope there will be fewer of them. An edict was also passed such that individuals and cooperatives will not have the right to produce, sell, or export certain goods without a license. Also, there will be a customs house, and unified tariffs will be imposed on goods that are being brought in and out of the country by citizens. In Alma-Ata today, a Ukraine delegation headed by the first Vice Premier Igor Yunovsky arrived in the capital of Kazakhstan. The goal of the trip is to re-establish disrupted economic ties. Kazakhstan is primarily interested in these. They will focus on establishing trade and economic cooperation for 1993 and establishing procedures for filing receipts between intergovernmental organizations. They will also focus on developing regulations to fill the obligations of debts and credits on both sides. This is particularly important since Ukraine has left the ruble zone. They signed agreements between the State Bank of Kazakhstan and the National Bank of Ukraine. Today, the Cabinet of Ministers held a meeting in the Donetsk region with the executive directors of various enterprises, and they discussed how to carry out privatization in practice. The meeting was led by the head advisor of the Prime Minister and the chairman on alternative economies. This is the first such institution in Ukraine and is led by Igor Markulev. No statements were made by the directors against privatization. Markulev said that privatization would be supported by Western hard currency credits in private business. And several commercial structures within the country have already expressed their readiness to improve the railroad, shipping, and air transportation of goods. The Ukraine government is also prepared to remove any barriers to economic reforms, and they emphasize that the most important economic region in Ukraine today is Donbas. Armored subdivisions of the People's Front in Tajikistan took control of opposition outposts today along the Pianchka region, so said Itar-Tas news agency today. Government troops have also squeezed out opposition forces in Kafornikhov in Fazibar region. They also took control of a hydroelectric station that is currently under construction called Pagunchi. Also, the deadline for voluntarily handing weapons has been extended 1 week. It should have expired yesterday at noon. At 5 p.m. this evening, Moscow time, Abkhaz gunmen started shelling Sukhumi. According to the Georgian command and control, they did not only use mortar launchers but Grad artillery. 5 innocent citizens were wounded and 1 Abkhazi woman died in an explosion in the city. According to Azerbaijan, Itar-Tas agency reports that Armenian forces began shelling in Ali Belan and Abdamjansky region today. The Azerbaijan army counterattacked by shelling Armenian military bases. The Vice Premier of Russia, the chairman of the State Committee on National Policy, Sergei Shakrai, said in Stavropol today that the region is prepared to support Russian policy in the Northern Caucasus and use force if necessary. This is very important in order to establish economic ties with adjacent regions in the Northern Caucasus, to establish a customs service, and to ensure security along the border of this southern area of Russia. The current position of the Russian leadership differs from its former position in that the Caucasus and the Northern Caucasus are seen as an inalienable portion of Russia, and it is seen as a zone of priority for the Russian Federation. As the chairman of the State Committee on National Policy, I need to say that I feel responsible for the region, and I'm in favor of establishing a Russian Policy Studies Center in the Stavropolsky Krai. I also think that we should ensure Russian policy in the Northern Caucasus region by using force if necessary. We need to support Russian policy here, and I think this is the only way it's possible. We need to establish a Northern Caucasus Okrug of internal forces and bring new people on board. We also need to have a new commander for the internal troops of Russia, and I think that as a result of this, the situation would become normalized. Again, the Vice Premier was in favor of establishing a center of policy studies in the region, and he felt that this could play a significant role in stabilizing the situation there. Today, from the Airbus Plesets, the satellite 2229 Cosmos was launched. On board are 2 chimpanzees, amphibious insects, bugs, plants, culture cells, and tissues. The mission of the satellite is to study the adaptation of live organisms in space. The 2 chimpanzees will spend 2 weeks in space. This is the 10th such satellite, and this is a new form of research that we are undertaking here. We will focus in greater depth upon the adaptation of living organisms during space flights. We will study questions related to motion sickness that is experienced when traveling into space. We will look at individual cells and nerve filaments. And we hope that as a result of this flight and by studying these chimpanzees, we will finally be able to understand the reasons behind space sickness that is experienced by astronauts when they go into space during their first few days. I'd like to add that all the research that is being conducted on these chimpanzees is being complied with the rules and regulations of the World Health Organization and the Helsinki Convention on the Humanitarian Use of Animals in Research. The word red in our language means beautiful, and this electric commuter train represents both red and beautiful. It is a present to us from the Demichovsky factory. Of course, the engine car was built by the Riga railroad production plant, who for a long time had a monopoly on railroad construction in terms of railroad cars. However, we hope that we will soon have a domestic industry in this market. We will have our own Russian commuter train, and in the near future we will be able to manufacture them on a large scale. Vice Premier of Russia Georgy Khizha said at a meeting today that today, thanks to the active position of industry and railroad transportation, the leadership of the country has established a program for manufacturing commuter trains, passenger trains, diesel locomotives, and electric locomotives. And all of this should, in the near future, be produced in Russian domestic factories. The new year is just around the corner, and no longer are we waiting for assistance from abroad. Instead, we are attempting to rely on ourselves. In order to avoid a crisis situation, we need to have sound legislation, sound taxation, coordinated government and commercial operations, and we need to have effective banks in place that will support financial and trade fluxes. Currently, we have a well-oiled banking system, and in the past year, The bank transactions amounted to 200 billion rubles. We are always looking for new services to provide, and we base our decisions on world experience and take into consideration specifics of our own country. The success of economic reform will also depend on the bank's ability to cope with unemployment and inflation. We will make plans for large-scale projects for next year based on studies that we've done in the industry, the military industry, in the terms of conversion. We'll focus on the fuel and energy complex, on agriculture and the like. And I would like to wish everyone in the country success, health, and prosperity, and hope that the Russian Stock Exchange Bank will play an effective role in the country's life next year. The President of Kazakhstan signed a decree on the war on corruption in government. At a briefing today, he said that corruption has reached such a scale that it threatens destabilization in the country. There's a special agency within the Ministry of Internal Affairs to make up for the fact that two other agencies that had been established for these purposes were ineffective. Askar Akayev is trying to unearth the indecent civil servants that have broken the law. However, he's finding opposition in the parliament, which recently denied the request of a general procurator to cross-examine some civil servants that were accused of being involved in contraband. Not long ago, along the Kyrgyz and Chinese border, 8 trucks were detained that contained equipment and imported goods, saiga antlers, ferrous metal, roofing materials, and the like. Many of these materials were supposed to have provided support in the aftermath of an earthquake here. Today, in the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs, there was a briefing on the war on corruption and organized crime. Journalists pulled out their notebooks, and at the same time, more and more munitions seem to have been piled up here in this department. There were automatic weapons, pistols, and 50-kilogram weights. Investigators continue to look into the situation to try to find those who are responsible. Registered today are more than 3,000 organized crime rings in the Russian Federation. 1/2 of all the money that is received for illegal business is being used to bribe civil servants. Employees of the Thermonuclear Center, well known as Arzamas 16, stole more than 2 million rubles worth of rare earth metals. Even law enforcement agents are involved in crime. 1,500 criminal cases have been brought forth this past year. And there is more bribery registered this year than in the past year. The Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs has been given several thousand additional units of heavy artillery, helicopters, armored vehicles, and the like in order to cope with the mafia and organized crime groups. However, these measures are not enough. We need to introduce special legislation such that government officials would also have to answer to the law. Today, Russian President Boris Yeltsin signed a decree to annul the system of state dachas in the Russian Federation. This decision was passed in order to improve social equality in the country and make it possible for the entire population to have access to recreation areas. Goskam Imущество, or the State Committee for Property, has until February 1, 1993 to decide how to dispose of these federal dachas. Today in Geneva, delegations from Russia and the United States reached agreement on several clauses in the START II treaty. At the end of the negotiations, Russian Foreign Minister Andrei Kozyrev and Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger said that they were able to reach some agreements on START II. In the documents to be signed by Presidents of Russia and the United States, the strategic armaments of both countries will be reduced by 2/3. In a short statement, Kozyrev, Eagleburger, and Defense Minister of Russia Pavel Grachev said that they were satisfied with the course of the negotiations. and they will report back to both Bush and Yeltsin. And a short stopover back to Russia, Minister of Foreign Affairs Andrei Kozyrev and Defense Minister Pavel Grochev met in Vienna with French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas. Today they arrived in Moscow. Today, representatives from the Defense Ministry of Lithuania and Russia decided on the withdrawal of troops and the 7th Motorized Division from Lithuania back into the Russian Federation territory. Currently, there do not seem to be any differences in terms of the system and procedure of withdrawals or the schedule for withdrawals. Lithuania has promised to send off the Russian troops with flowers when they finally indeed leave. Today, there were flowers in the city, and the representatives of both delegations celebrated with champagne, and those were the only shots heard in the city today. Brazilian President Fernando Collor, removed from the parliament by impeachment, has resigned today. He was accused of corruption and abuse of power and has been replaced by Itamar Franco, who took oath today. The new head of state vowed to follow the laws of the country as well as the constitution and will make all efforts to devote himself to the flourishment of Brazil. U.S. Marines and Canadian forces took control of Vila Duel, a central point in Somalia today. This is one of the 7 cities that have now been taken under control, which are to act as centers for distribution of humanitarian aid. There are 222,000 tons of foodstuffs in the port of Mogadishu that have been unloaded, and this is enough to feed the total population for 1 week. In a bombing near the Japanese and Chinese embassies in Tehran, 10 people were wounded, and several other buildings surrounded were damaged during an automobile explosion. Extremists called the revolution expropriation took responsibility. In Romania today, we'd like to recognize Dom Charan. He's a successful entrepreneur. He's not a banker or a trade representative. He is the co-director of a sewing factory. For 5 months, they had pure profits of $1 million US. He's the first person in Romania to privatize a large factory. Many international companies, including French, Japanese, and Italian firms, were interested in purchasing stock. 71% of the stock, however, was sold to the Italian firm Incon under the conditions that over the course of 5 years it will provide orders to the sewing factory and will invest $5 million into the sewing factory. 29% of the stock was sold to the workers at the sewing factory. As a result, theft and absenteeism has come to a halt, and wages have increased twofold. They amount to about 40,000 rubles per year, and this is more than the average in the country. Over the past year, there were more and more passions surrounding the AIDS scandal, in which more than 1,000 people were infected with the AIDS virus during blood transfusions that took place 7 years ago. This case was brought up again in October. However, it is still pending. The National Assembly of the Senate is passing decisions on the responsibility of the former ministers in the government at that time of Laurent Fabius. Involved are the Minister of Health, Jean-Gilles Dufont, and the Health Secretary, Edmond Hervé. The former Prime Minister, Laurent Fabius, also will be held responsible too. In the future, we expect that this will last several more months before this case has finally been brought to a halt, and they've finally made some decisions. on who is truly responsible for this incident. In India, according to the constitution, all people are equal, and it doesn't matter whether you are a member of the opposition or the ruling parties. Any individual can be arrested for breaking the law. They can also be freed on bail. This is what happened with Adwan, the leader of the Hindu BJP party, who is indicted for provoking religious strife in the country. And some people feel that it was right that he was able to be freed again on bail. However, the question today is whether or not there will be parliamentary elections or not. This seems to be looming in the future, but no one is in a rush to take them. There are demonstrations continuously being held in the streets of Indian cities. Unfortunately, the central government and the Congress seem to be unable to remove from power the powerful Hindu BJP party. Some people say that according to the latest poll taken in India, only 9% of the population is in favor of taking measures to remove the BJP. That is 9 more than those who are opposed to it. Today, the chairman of the Constitutional Court, Valery Zorkin, was the first laureate of the International Non-Government Prize of National Consensus. This is established by the committee of the same name and the editorial department of the Komsomolskaya Pravda. This is based on making it possible to overcome political, economic, and social conflicts within a country. According to Itar-TASS news agency, chief editor Vladislav Primer said that Zorkin will be awarded $5,000, and Zorkin said that he will donate all of this to charity. Today, Gennady Borblis visited the city of Obmansk, and he met with scientific and cultural circles there. He said that he intends to establish an international regional center to study global tendencies and developments. As of the 1st of January 1993, the Moscow Independent Cooperation, led by Edward Sajalayev and U.S. television producer Ted Turner, will be establishing an independent television station. Programs will be shown on Channel 6. There'll be informational programs and CNN footage and films that will be shown in Moscow only for the time being on Channel 6. According to Sigalayev, these will be family programs and informational programs. They will work initially 5 hours a day, and then they will move to programming around the clock. This will make it possible to increase the number of viewers. Despite the risk involved and the great difficulties, the representatives here, including Sidney Pike, who works with Ted Turner, said that the independent channel will be quite unique indeed, and those involved are full of enthusiasm and hope for great success. On the stage today, these performers are celebrating the upcoming New Year. What is strange here is that the typical Christmas tree is not present here. However, what is most important is having a good mood and receiving gifts. Hundreds of kids here today will receive gifts from the international organization Kind Heart and from the U.S. chocolate bar company Mars. And everyone will be receiving gifts from the well-known comic strip characters and folklore characters who are dancing here on the stage. Today in Nizhny Novgorod, for the first time in 35 years of the existence of local television, the federal, state television and radio programs were not broadcast. This is because the Nizhny Novgorod Radio and Television Center refused state television access to broadcasting their programs. As a result, 3.5 million television viewers were without access to our news program. On this, I close and say goodbye. Evening news at midnight will be broadcast by Tatiana Mitkova.
Нас знают все.
MMM. Everyone knows about us. This is not a fairy tale about a luxurious lifestyle, fancy clothes, fancy furniture, and modern office equipment. This is not even an advertisement for Holding Center where all this can be acquired. This is the lifestyle that Holding Center provides. Offers flights between Moscow, Norilsk, and Moscow every Saturday. Call the number 095-241-8706.
Good evening.
There's such a wealth of sports news today that we'll try to select the most interesting items of news available. The two-time Olympic champ in the rifle competition, Maria Lyubkin from Rostov-on-the-Don, was declared the best athlete in Russia in technical sports. And we have some disappointing information for sports fans. 4 days ago, the best woman athlete of the year was declared Petra Kronberg from Austria, two-time Olympic champion in Albertville, three-time World Cup champ. She's 23 years old, and the sad thing is that she's declared that she will be leaving athletics. She wishes to focus her attention on finishing college and entering the university. Her example was also followed, according to the Reuters news agency, by Germany's tennis player Steffi Graf. We can only guess her reasons for doing so. Today, the World Championship in Sweden continues today. We're waiting for results from the game between Canada and Russia. Both teams have only wins and no losses. 2 out of 10 matches were played between the Olympic players of Russia against the Canadian Olympic team. 6-5 was the score of the first game in favor of Russia, 4-5 in favor of Canada for the second match. The Spengler Cup trophy continues in Davos, Switzerland. The Moscow Armitsy team are very popular, and it is possible that they will be in the final rounds, although it's still early to say for sure. The Canadian team played against the Swiss 4-3. Moscow Dynamo team is still playing without losses, and today will meet with the Germany's team at Düsseldorf. And finally, in closure, we'd like to just show a short video clip in favor of New Year. The first part, as I'd like to say, follows, and I think that you should think of your own commentary to accompany the video. SP Intercommerce provides digital scales, electronic cash registers, refrigerators, furniture, and special Japanese labeling guns, all for rubles. Please come to our special exhibit. 163-7286 is our telephone number in Moscow, and in St. Petersburg, 164-234-3782. Please call. Rhinoceros concern. Minotep. Nothing special, simply a reliable bank. Minotep. Nothing special, just a reliable bank.
Onyx.
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 Onyx. And the weather for the 30th of December in Celsius. Northern Caucasus, some snowfall and blizzard. Middle and Lower Volga, Central Black Earth region, also some blizzard. Central region, light snowfall and blizzard. Kaliningrad region, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, snowfall and blizzards. Ukraine, in some places light snow. St. Petersburg, light snow. Moscow, morning and evening, -8 to -10. Every now and then, slight snow and a light blizzard.